The Justice of the Elephant by Clark Ashton Smith. Nikal Singh, Raja of Anapur, was acquiring the obese complacency of middle age, and his memories were blurred and befogged by a liberal use of Rajput opium. It was seldom that he recalled a Mira, though, as a general rule, an unfaithful woman is not the easiest thing in the world to forget. But Nikal Singh had possessed so many wives and concubines, and one more or less was of no great importance, even though she had been eyed like the sloe and footed like the gazelle, and had preferred an elephant driver to a Raja. And as Nikal Singh grew older and became warier of women and fonder of opium, such matters were even less memorable or worthy of consideration. However, the incident had angered him greatly at the time, and the doom he had devised for Amira was the most atrocious one conceivable. Her story was long remembered and whispered in the royal zenana, though whether or not the example had served to deter others from similar derelictions is a moot problem. Amira was a dancing girl, and therefore of low birth, and her rise in the Raja's favor had not been regarded with unqualified approval by his legitimate wives. Under the circumstances, it was highly unwise for Amira to carry on a love affair with the comely young elephant driver Ramadas, for there were many jealous eyes to make note the amour, and jealous tongues to bear tattle thereof to Nikal Singh. Amira had been watched, and a man was seen leaving her apartments in the early morning hours. The man was not positively identified as Ramadas, but the presence of anyone save the Raja in those sacrosanct purlieus was enough to damn the unfortunate girl. The punishment inflicted by Nikal Singh was no less swift than dreadful. The girl was condemned to a death usually reserved for the lowest criminals, and her suspected lover, Ramadas, by refinement of Rajput cruelty, was chosen as her executioner. She was made to kneel and place her head on a block of stone in the palace courtyard, and thereupon the great elephant, ridden by Ramadas, at a signal from the driver, lifted one of his enormous hoofs and brought it down on the head of the dancing girl, crushing her to an instant pulp. During the awful ordeal, no sign of recognition or emotion was betrayed either by Ramadas or Amira, and the gloating Raja was perhaps disappointed in this respect. A day or two afterward, the young elephant driver disappeared from Anapur, and no one knew whether he had been secretly made away with by Nikal Singh or had vanished of his own accord. 10 years had now passed, and the affair was overlaid, even in the minds of the Raja's eldest wives, by a score of later scandals and by the petty happenings of the palace. And when the position of mahout to Ragna, the huge elephant that bore the Raja himself on all formal occasions, became vacant through death, no one would have connected the half-forgotten Ramadas with the new applicant Ramchandar, who vowed his fitness to take charge of Ragna and offered credentials testifying to years of faithful and efficient service under the Maharaja of a state in Bundelcund. And least of all would it have occurred to Nikal Singh himself that the grave, taciturn, heavy-bearded Ramchandar and the blithe, beardless Ramadas were the same person. Somehow, though there were many other applicants, Ramchandar insinuated himself into the desired position. And since he was a competent driver, who had obviously mastered the language of elephants down to its last and most subtle inflection, no one, not even his fellow mahouts, found reason to disapprove or criticize his appointment. Ragna, also, appeared to like his new driver, and that ideal confidence and understanding which often exists between the mahout and the animal soon sprang up between these two. Ragna, after the fashion of a well-tutored elephant, was wise and erudite in regard to all that it was proper for him to know, but he learned some new manners and graces beneath the instruction of Ramchandar, and was even taught in private 1 or 2 tricks that are not usually part of the curriculum of a state elephant. Of these latter no one dreamt, and Ramchandar preserved an inscrutable silence, and Nikol Singh was wholly unaware of the strange, sardonic, sinister regard with which he was watched by the new mahout from Bundelcund. Nikol Singh had grown fonder than ever of his opium, and cared less and less for other pleasures or distractions. But now, in his 40th year, for political reasons, it was agreed upon by his ministers that he must take another wife. The Rani had recently died without leaving him a male heir, and the young daughter of the neighboring Raja of Ailmere was selected as her successor. All the necessary arrangements and elaborate protocols were made, and the day was set for the marriage. Nikol Singh was secretly bored by the prospect, but was publicly resigned to his royal duty. The feelings of the bride, perhaps, were even more problematical. The day of the marriage dawned in torrid saffron. A great procession coming from Ailmere was to bring the bride into Anapur, and Nikol Singh, with another stately procession, was to meet her outside the gates of his capital. It was a gorgeous ceremony. Nikol Singh, seated in a golden and a jewel-encrusted howdah on the superb elephant Ragna, passed slowly through the streets of Anapur, followed by the court dignitaries on other elephants, and a small army of horsemen, all splendidly caparisoned. There was much firing of jezails and cannon by the soldiers, and banging of musical instruments among the populace. The mahout Ramchandar, grave and impassive as usual, sat on Ragna's neck. Nikol Singh, who had fortified himself with a large lump of his favorite drug, was equally impassive on his broidered cushions in the howdah. The procession emerged through the open gate of Anapur, and beheld at some distance, in a cloud of summer dust, the approach of the bride and her attendants, forming an array no less magnificent and sumptuous than that which was headed by Nikol Singh. As the 2 processions neared each other, an event occurred which was not a prearranged part of the ceremonial. At a secret signal from Ramchandar, perceived and understood only by the elephant himself, Ragna suddenly halted, reached into the great howdah with his trunk, seized Nikol Singh in a tenacious embrace, and, hailing the Raja forth in a most undignified and ignominious manner, deposited him on his knees in the road, and forced him to bow his head in the dust before the bride's approaching litter. Then, almost before his action was comprehended by the stupefied throng, Ragna raised one of his front hoofs, and calmly proceeded to crush the Raja's head into a flat, formless jelly. Then, trumpeting wildly, menacing all who stood in his way, and apparently defying the frantic signals and commands of his driver, Ragna plunged through the crowd and quickly vanished in the nearby jungle, still carrying Ramchandar and the empty howdah. Amid the confusion and consternation that prevailed, it was assumed that Ragna had been seized by the vicious madness to which elephants are sometimes liable. When a semblance of order had been restored, he was followed by a troop of the Raja's horsemen, armed with jezails. They found him an hour later, browsing peacefully in a jungle glade without his driver, and dispatched him with a volley, not trusting his appearance of renewed mildness. The assumption that Ragna had gone must was universal, and no one thought of Ramadas and the death of Amira 10 years before. However, the disappearance of the new mahout, Ramchandar, was no less a mystery than the earlier vanishment of Ramadas, if anyone had remembered to draw the parallel. The body of Ramchandar was never found, and no one knew to a certainty whether he had been killed by Ragna in the thick jungle or had run away from Anapur through fear of being held responsible for Ragna's behavior. But mad elephants are prone to wreak their malignity on all accessible victims, even their own mahouts, so it was considered very unlikely that Ramchandar could have escaped.